Stella's life was forever changed when her husband passed away just 3 years after their marriage. She was an orphan. The pain was still fresh when she gave birth to their son, Stanley, 2 months later. But her husband's family showed her no compassion. Instead, they tormented her, tortured her, and eventually threw her out of her husband's house. With a heavy heart and a newborn baby, Stella returned to her village, forced to start life afresh. No one asked about her well-being or offered a helping hand. She was left to fend for herself and her son. Determined to give Stanley the best life possible, Stella worked tirelessly. She labored on farms, picked blocks, and did numerous odd jobs, often working day and night. Her days were filled with exhaustion, but her love for Stanley kept her going. As Stanley grew, Stella's love for him only deepened. She wanted to give him the best life, regardless of how unfortunate life had been toward her. This continued until Stanley turned 7. Tragedy struck when Stanley fell ill. Despite Stella's best efforts, everything they did to revive him proved abortive. Stella was consumed by fear, and she cried out to God, begging for His mercy. In desperation, Stella rushed Stanley to the hospital. But the doctor's words pierced her heart like a dagger. "We won't touch him until you make a deposit of 100,000 naira. Stella was devastated. She began to run around, searching for money, but there was none. Stella's desperation grew as she searched for money. She took on any instant job she could find, and begged neighbors, determined to raise the funds needed to save Stanley's life. After hours of begging and searching, she managed to scrape together 50,000 naira. With a glimmer of hope, Stella rushed back to the hospital, arriving at 8 p.m. But her relief was short-lived. The doctors rejected her plea to start treating Stanley with the 50,000 naira deposit. They insisted that the full 100,000 naira was required before they could begin treatment. Stella wailed and cried, begging the doctors to show mercy. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. The doctors left her standing there, confused and helpless. In a daze, Stella stumbled out of the hospital, into the dark night, determined to find the remaining 50,000 naira needed to save Stanley's life. It was 10:30 p.m., and the streets were deserted. As she walked, a group of 5 boys emerged from the shadows, their eyes gleaming with malice. They surrounded Stella, their hands grasping for her. Stella tried to fight back, but she was no match for the 5 boys. They molested her, leaving her battered and bruised on the ground. Stella's world went dark as she lost consciousness. The next day, Stella slowly opened her eyes to find herself in a hospital bed. A kind-faced nurse smiled at her, explaining that a good Samaritan had brought her to the hospital after finding her unconscious on the street. Stella's mind was foggy, but as she remembered Stanley, her heart raced with worry. She quickly dragged out the drip and injection, and dashed out of the hospital bed, despite the nurse's attempts to restrain her. "I have to go," Stella exclaimed, her eyes wild with desperation. "My son, Stanley. I have to save him." The hospital staff tried to hold her back, but Stella broke free, her only thought being to find a way to save her son's life. As Stella rushed to the hospital where Stanley was admitted, she was prepared to beg the doctors to show mercy. She arrived, out of breath, and approached the doctor's desk. "Please, doctor," Stella begged, tears streaming down her face. "I know I couldn't raise the complete 100,000 naira, but I'm willing to do anything to save my son's life. I was robbed and molested on my way to get the remaining money. Please, have mercy on us." The doctor's expression softened as he listened to Stella's story. He nodded sympathetically and handed her a surprise. "Mom, I have some good news for you," the doctor said with a smile. "A good Samaritan, who regularly pays the bills of patients in need, has covered Stanley's medical expenses. You don't need to pay anything." Stella's eyes widened in shock and gratitude. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "But that's not all," the doctor continued. "The Good Samaritan also left some money for you. Here it is." The doctor handed Stella an envelope containing a substantial amount of money. Stella's heart overflowed with joy and thanksgiving. She knew that God had sent an angel to rescue her and Stanley in their time of need. After 2 weeks, Stanley had fully recovered, and they were discharged from the hospital. Stella was determined to rebuild her life and provide a better future for her son. She used the remaining money from the Good Samaritan to start a small business. Stella rented a small portion of land and bought a few provisions to start a tiny shop. At first, things were difficult, and sales were slow. But Stella was determined and worked tirelessly to make her business grow. With time, her shop started to blossom, and people began to buy from her. As her business grew, Stella rented a bigger shop and expanded her products. Things were finally starting to fall into place, or so she thought. But unbeknownst to her, more tragedy was lurking around the corner. One morning, Stella opened her shop, only to find it empty. All her goods were gone, and her bag of money was nowhere to be found. The shop had been burglarized, leaving Stella with nothing. Stella's heart sank as she surveyed the empty shop. She had worked so hard to build her business, and now it was all gone. She felt like she had been punched in the gut, and her breath had been knocked out of her. How could this be happening to her again? Stella thought, feeling like she was being tested to the limit. She had thought that she had finally found a way out of her troubles, but now it seemed like she was back to square one. Stanley, now 9 years old, returned home from school to find his mother in a state of distress. Stella's face was streaked with tears, and she had been crying uncontrollably since morning. Stanley's heart sank as he realized something was terribly wrong. "Mom, what's wrong?" Stanley asked, concern etched on his face. Stella tried to compose herself, but the words stumbled out in a sobbing mess. "My shop, Stanley, it's been robbed. Everything is gone." Stanley's eyes widened in shock, but he quickly wrapped his arms around his mother, trying to comfort her. "Don't worry, Mom. We'll get through this. We'll start again." Stella smiled weakly, grateful for her son's strength and resilience. Stanley was her rock, her everything. He was the reason she kept going, even in the face of adversity. With newfound determination, Stella decided to start afresh. She gathered the little savings she had left in her account and at home, determined to rebuild her business. The next day, Stella went to the bank to withdraw some of the remaining money. She planned to add it to the cash she had at home and use it to restock her shop and pay the rent. As she walked to the market, Stella felt a sense of hope rising within her. Maybe, just maybe, things would start looking up again. But fate had other plans. As she walked, Stella was suddenly surrounded by a group of rough-looking men. They snatched the money from her hands, leaving her with nothing. Stella's heart sank, and she felt like she had been punched in the gut. How could this be happening to her again? Stella's cries echoed through the empty streets as she stumbled back home, her heart shattered into a million pieces. She couldn't understand why God had abandoned her, why he had allowed her to suffer so much. God, why? Stella wailed, her voice hoarse from crying. What have I done to deserve this? I've lost everything, my business, my savings, what's left for me? But there was only silence. No answers, no comfort. Just the cold, harsh reality of her situation. Stella trudged back home, her spirit crushed. She felt like she was back at square one, forced to start all over again from scratch. With a heavy heart, Stella began doing small jobs again, just to put food on the table. She and Stanley worked together, doing odd jobs to make ends meet. But the pain of her struggles was compounded by the fact that Stanley had to drop out of school. She couldn't afford his school fees anymore, and he was chased out of school. As they struggled to survive, people mocked Stella, calling her a failure. But she held on to one thing, the hope that her son, Stanley, would become someone great in the future, someone who would wipe away her tears and restore her dignity. Stella's eyes would light up whenever she thought about Stanley's future. She knew that he was intelligent, hardworking, and kind. She was convinced that he would make a better life for himself and for her. And so, despite the overwhelming hardships, Stella held on to that flicker of hope. She knew that as long as Stanley was by her side, she could face anything life threw her way. Stella and Stanley tried to find happiness in the small things. They struggled to make ends meet, but they never lost hope. When Stanley turned 14, a wealthy man named Chief Okizi came to the village. He was a renowned businessman who dealt in the importation and exportation of household electrical equipment. Chief Okizi was returning from a trip to the village when his car suddenly stopped moving. He got out of the car to investigate the problem, but it refused to start. Frustrated, Chief Okizi tried to call his mechanic, but as he reached into his pocket to grab his phone, a huge sum of money fell out. Stanley, who was walking by on his way to fetch water, saw the money fall from Chief Okizi's pocket. Without hesitation, he quickly picked it up and ran to the car. Chief Okizi, still trying to figure out his car troubles, wound down the window, and Stanley handed him the money. "Thank you, young man," Chief Okizi said, impressed by Stanley's honesty. "I didn't even notice it had fallen out." Stanley smiled and nodded, feeling happy that he had done the right thing. Little did he know that this chance encounter would change his life forever. Chief Okizi was so impressed with Stanley's honesty that he decided to learn more about the young boy. He asked around the village and discovered that Stanley was living in poverty with his mother, Stella. Moved by their story, Chief Okizi decided to offer Stanley an opportunity. He offered to take Stanley to the city with him and teach him his business. In return, Stanley would serve Chief Okizi for 7 years, after which he would be settled. Stella was overjoyed when Chief Okizi made the offer. She saw it as a breakthrough, a chance for her son to have a better life. 2 days later, Chief Okizi met with Stella again, and Stanley was taken to the chief's estate to begin his new life. As the years passed, Stanley proved himself to be a diligent and honest servant. He won the hearts of his master's wife and daughter with his humility and truthfulness. Stanley and Stacy, his master's daughter, had grown fond of each other. However, Stanley was cautious in his interactions with her, fearing that his master might misinterpret their friendship. Stanley never forgot about his mother, Stella, who was struggling to make ends meet in the village. He would send her what little money he could, whenever he could. Stella was always thankful for her son's kindness and would often pack food and clothes and send them to him in the city. But disaster struck in the final year of Stanley's service. 2 months before he was to be settled, he was falsely accused of stealing his master's money and having an illicit relationship with Stacy. The accusations were baseless, but Stanley had no one to defend him. He was thrown out of his master's house, his reputation tarnished by false accusations. Stanley was too ashamed to return to the village and face his mother. How could he go back to her after 7 years with nothing but a bad story? His mother had suffered for so long, and Stanley had thought that his settlement was the key to their success. But now, with his reputation tarnished and his dreams shattered, Stanley felt like a failure. He couldn't bear the thought of disappointing his mother, so he avoided her calls and messages. Whenever she asked when he was coming home, Stanley would tell her that he was busy setting up his new shop with the settlement money and that he would return soon. But this was just a lie to buy himself time. For 2 months, Stanley wandered the streets of Lagos, trying to make ends meet by hawking. One day, as he was selling his wares, he caught the attention of a young man named Alex. Alex had been monitoring Stanley from afar, and he saw a great destiny in the young man. Moved by Stanley's determination, Alex decided to help him. Alex took Stanley to his house, where he clothed him, fed him, and sheltered him. After a week of kindness, Alex asked Stanley about his life. Stanley opened up to him, sharing his story, his struggles, and his mother's suffering. Alex felt pity for Stanley and decided to help him make a better life for himself. Stanley, eager to make a change, told Alex that he would do anything genuine to make money. Further telling Alex that he was lucky to be born in a good and wealthy family. Alex's laughter echoed through the sitting room as he looked at Stanley with a smirk. He cleared his throat and began to narrate the story of his life. "I was an orphan, Stanley," he said. "I've been through thick and thin. Everything I tried to do was futile. I suffered, I struggled to make ends meet, but I couldn't even feed myself 1 square meal a day." Alex's eyes gleamed with intensity as he continued. "But then, I got an opportunity that changed my life for good. And that opportunity is what I'm willing to share with you, Stanley, if only you're willing and ready to take it." Stanley's curiosity was piqued as Alex began to tell him about his fraternity. "You see, Stanley, I'm part of a group of successful men who have made it in life. And we're willing to share our secrets with you, but you have to be willing to do one thing for us." Stanley's eyes narrowed as he waited for Alex to reveal what that one thing was. Alex smiled reassuringly. "All you need to do is recruit new souls, new people who are struggling to make it in life. That's all. You don't need to shed blood or do anything sinister. Just find people who are willing to join our fraternity, and you'll be set for life." Alex's words were like honey to Stanley's ears. He was tempted by the promise of wealth and success. He thought about his poor mother, Stella, and how he could finally give her the life she deserved. He looked at Alex, his eyes searching for reassurance. "How do I know this is real?" Stanley asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How do I know this isn't some kind of scam?" Alex chuckled. "I've been part of this fraternity for 5 years now, Stanley. And I can tell you, it's real. I've never had to shed blood or do anything I'm not comfortable with. All I do is find new recruits, and the money keeps flowing in." Stanley's mind was racing with thoughts and doubts. He wasn't sure if he should trust Alex or not. But the promise of wealth and success was too tempting to resist. He looked at Alex, his eyes searching for reassurance. "I need some time to think about it," Stanley said finally, his voice firm but hesitant. Can you give me some time to think about it?
What will be Stanley's decision? Is Alex the light at the end of the tunnel for Stanley?